So, good day, I would say, to everyone. Now we're starting with the second part of this session about careers and skills for the labor market of the future. I hope you'll enjoy the coffee break, especially the Italian espressos, and the beautiful settings that we have here in Palazzo Renzo. So now we're going to have a panel discussion, and it will be done this way. We'll have more or less 1 hour of discussion between our panelists, and then we'll have more or less half an hour of Q&A from the audience. So I'm going to introduce you the speakers. Myself, I am Matteo Vespa, the International Officer of UDU, Unione degli Universitari, the National Union of Students, and also board member of the European Students' Union. Then we have Ulf Daniel Ehlers, the Vice President of Eurasia, the organization representing the European profession-oriented higher education institutions. We have Silvia Bernardini, professor at the Department of Interpreting and Translation at the University of Bologna. We had Janne Loikkanen, the vice chair of the employability working group of the Coimbra Group, who is the network gathering together some of the oldest universities in Europe. And then we have Chiara Finocchietti, the deputy chair of the CIMEA, the Italian National Accreditation Recognition Information Center, part of the ENIC-NAREC system, and also co-chair of the Bologna follow-up group, thematic peer group B on the Lisbon Recognition Convention. Thank you. So, oh God. We start with Mr. Ehlers. Your latest work has been on the on what actually we're talking about, so the skills that will be needed on the future of the labor market. But you also trying to invented the term of future skills, which are a particular set of skills, and also in your latest project has also envisioned how the higher education institutions can actually provide these skills, also in, I will say, a very innovative way. Can you tell us more about your project and its findings?
Yeah, thank you very much, Matteo. I must confess I did not quite invent the term, but I like it, so we use it. In Eurasia, as the Association for Institutes of Higher Education, or we say professional higher education, we are very concerned with how to create meaningful connections and integration between what we call the world of work and academia. And we're very, very fascinated by all the different models which are existing in Europe throughout the countries. So one issue which we are very concerned of, and I think we all are here, is the issue of skills. And the work you were referring to is called the Next Skills Project. That's nextskills.org. If you're interested in the details and the data, go there. It's nextskills.org. And our ambition was actually in a situation where we are now, where the World Economic Forum is coming up with a list of future skills, and the UNESCO is coming up with a list of future skills, and PISA is publishing a list of key skills, and the OECD framework for future skills has been published just recently. We were actually thinking, how can we overcome this list issue? That everybody is creating their list of future skills, and what are actually the underlying structures of these lists? And that was the aim to start this Next Skills project. It is focusing on future skills, so what are important future skills and what are underlying structures? Secondly, how are organizations supporting their employees, their members? They are not always employees in NGOs, sometimes they are members, not employed members, in networks also. So what are successful ways to support this future skill development? And then thirdly, to ask the question, is higher education prepared to support and to help students to develop these future skills? So these were the three questions we have. And We did a lot of interviews, we did a lot of screening of organizational concepts, and we tried to identify what we call future organizations. These are the organizations which are very, very advanced in their thinking about support and development of future skills for their members, for their employees. And these, when we found these organizations, we were really deep diving into them, and we were analyzing them through in-depth interview studies, talking to the people, talking to the students, to the employees, to the HR managers, and so on. And we were identifying that there are three major shifts going on. The first shift is that due to the unpredictability and the very, very volatile context, which can only be characterized in future organizations as this term we have emergence, emergence, high emergent context. So due to the future unpredictable, volatile contexts characterized through emergence, high emergence, the responsibility for understanding what do I need to solve a problem and what do I need to develop in order to bring and to support this organization. What do I need to understand for my field of activity, actually. So the responsibility for understanding and developing this is shifting from external references like curricula, for example, or standards, professional standards, or higher education institutions or other educational, vocational education institutions, is shifting from there to the individual. That is why skills like self-competency, self-concept, self-reflection, self-efficacy are gaining importance. The second big shift was, second big shift we identified was that the contribution of stored knowledge, which you have stored or learned by heart in your memory, of stored knowledge, of the concept of knowledge like we understand it today in higher education institutions. So the contribution of knowledge to solving work problems in the future is decreasing. It is not becoming obsolete, it is not becoming unimportant, but an additional factor is more important and gaining more importance, which we saw in the last presentation, which was called universal skills, transversal skills. And I like to avoid this term soft skills, because what we see is that soft skills in the future are the new hard currency. So we have to rethink this term a little bit and think in a new light about it. And the third shift was that the contribution of an individual to the definition of their own work environment, the organizational processes, how organizations are set up actually, how the environment, the context is shaped in which I work, is rising dramatically. So we talked to many CEOs and they were all saying, we are more and more coming into a moderating role, and we need the expertise from the decentral, from the peripheral elements of our organizations. And if they do not understand that they define this organization and we just try to give coherence to this organization, then the future of our organization will not work anymore. So these are the three major shifts, and resulting from that, and then I come to an end, we were asking in an international Delphi study, what do you think, 50 experts, international from I think even all five continents, what do you think, how well prepared are universities to help students to develop skills which are resulting from these three shifts. The result was really very, very clear, although it can be questioned in many ways because it's a very global question. And you know that higher education systems, not even in Europe, are homogeneous, less and at least in the entire global world. But still, it was a very, very clear result which showed that on all aspects of these 17 future skills which we identified, higher education institutions are seen to be not yet capable to support students in the development. So that's the provocative end of the story so far, but I think we have some more time to discuss following questions. Thanks a lot.
Dankeschön. Now we have Silvia Bernardini. So we can say that language is probably one of the most characteristic features of human species. However, concerning languages and translations, in Europe we see two trends. On the one hand, our European societies are becoming more multilingual, thanks both to the process of European integration and international migration. And on the other hand, artificial intelligence-powered technologies are accomplishing many of the tasks that were done before by human translators. So in such a context, what becomes the role of the translator?
Well, thank you very much, Matteo. And let me first start answering this very complex question. I only have 3 minutes, you see, so I'll try to be brief. My role here is, I think, that of bringing in a sort of case study, so you can see what I'm going to say as related to translator training, translator education, linguists, or the teaching and training of linguistic skills, but also as a special case of a more general trend. So I'm going to refer to translation here as a general term for the many professions that have to do with mediating between languages and cultures. And think of interpreters on TV, think of localizers of games and dubbers and subtitlers of movies. Translators are everywhere, they're just not very visible, because if they're good, that's what people usually say, if they're good, you won't notice them. Okay. And the fact they're not visible means that sometimes their role, their presence in society is not perceived very clearly. Like Matteo was saying, we're currently experiencing a situation whereby the role of translators everywhere is under pressure for many different reasons. First of all, many of us speak more than one language, and this is a very good thing. Okay, so we're able to mediate without a professional doing it for us. That's positive. And there are also more people who are willing to translate and interpret on a volunteer basis, so as a service to society. And I see that also as a very positive trend, unless, of course, you consider that from the point of view of a professional or of a course or a department that tries to train future professionals in that field. There's also, I think, a more worrying and also more generalized issue, which is the role of artificial intelligence in that profession. And I think this applies certainly to translation. I'm sure you're all familiar with Google Translate. Yeah, you know how good certain applications have become and how society now perceives the role of a translator as a sort of, someone you can do without, because you have an application that can take over. Now, this is typical of translation for sure, but there are several studies that say that this also applies to all other professions. There's a very interesting study by Stanford University called a 100-year study on artificial intelligence that says all professions are going to be affected by artificial intelligence, from radiologists to gardeners to drivers. right? Truck drivers and taxi drivers will probably disappear as a profession. Now, we don't train taxi drivers at universities, so we may not be worried about that, but what about the clinical professions and even lawyer professions? Every single profession is affected nowadays by artificial intelligence. So I'm going to be talking about, also in the next questions or in the following discussion, about the pressures of artificial intelligence of many of our professions. The way I see the role of the translator for the future is then a role whereby translators and interpreters and so on have to become both more creative, so taking over those roles that machines cannot carry out, but also at the same time more technologically minded or more able to use technology. And can we, and this is a question I guess that I'm going to ask the audience, can we really train a person to be both more creative and also an information engineer? Right? Can we achieve that in the course of a single master's program? So more able to cope with the technology, more able to be creative, but also being able to change, to adapt. And this is also, I'm very glad that this morning this idea of adaptability has resurfaced continuously, because we feel that in our field, this is an especially crucial issue that for the time being, we find difficulties tackling. So making our students more resourceful, more able to adapt to changing conditions. Again, it happens to us. It's very relevant to our field, but I believe it's a more general issue that we've been listened to repeatedly.
Grazie mille. Also, just one hint on that. We have also to remind us one of the most important scientists, let's just take only Einstein, had both an extensive classical knowledge and technological knowledge. So now we have Janne Loikkanen. So you represent also the Coimbra group, and you've also worked on how international mobility can actually foster the employability of students. Can you tell us more about the project that you've been studying in the group? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting, and I really want to say that personally, I'm very proud to be part of this kind of celebration, because as we saw yesterday, really the Bologna process has been really influenced, and I'm really happy personally that this is a great example of real European cooperation. And that's a real achievement that we should be celebrating. And secondly, we had very good keynote speakers just before the coffee break, and what I found out was that a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about have already been touched there. But I am not going to apologize for the repetition, because we all know that repetition is a key to learning. So please, we can learn here. As you said, I represent the Coimbra group here, and inside the Coimbra group we have 11 working groups, and I am representing both employability working group and academic exchange and mobility working group. Coimbra group is I'm sure many of you know what Coimbra group is, but I'm just telling you shortly that it's a network of 39 long-established multidisciplinary research universities. And as this opportunity arose to be part of this seminar, we decided to join forces with the employability and academic exchange and mobility, and together with 7 university representatives, we set up a small project on looking at what kind of skills students' international experience brings, and how do these skills affect to the students' working life, or how they can be used in the working life, in the labor market. So we did this by compiling existing research, looking at the EU survey reports that the students have to fill in after they come back from the mobility experience, and of course took a look on our own services on skills development. For example, many of us have workshops for the students to reflect what they have actually learned in the international experience. And by this, we are trying to make some recommendations on the role of universities in supporting these skills, which I personally believe that is very important. Over the 5,000 student opinions that we looked, we saw a clear message of the importance that the students place on the international experience themselves. For example, 90%, almost 90% of those who did an internship abroad felt that they really have increased the chances of getting a new or better job after graduation, and 50% said that it was an ultimate experience on that sense. So, in other words, we can say that the students really think that they have gained skills that are useful in the labor market. This all goes well with the Finnish research study done a few years ago called Hidden Competencies, where they actually concluded by research that the international mobility produces exactly the kind of competencies that the employers are looking for. But the problem is that the employers don't recognize them. They are not able to link these competencies with international experience. Hidden Competencies also argues that traditional attributes that are linked to international experience, such as language skills, obviously, intercultural skills, tolerance or broad-mindedness, these are all good skills, but they don't kind of grasp the essence of international mobility, international experiences. So therefore, they found 3 new skills areas that they wanted to highlight there. Namely, these are the hidden aspects, as they say, namely productivity, resilience, and curiosity. Curiosity was also mentioned in Pavel Sorokin's presentation. So these are crucial skills that employers value and international experience enhances, but they often remain unrecognized. So therefore, if the students with international experience expect that they have gained skills and abilities to get a good job after graduation, and actually they have gained the skills, they don't just expect that, they actually have gained these skills. And these are exactly the skills that the employers value. So, but they don't necessarily recognize them. It's not easy for us to teach the employers to recognize this, but we can, or universities as educators, we need to equip students with the tools how they can detect and express these hidden skills. So we need to have educators, maybe that's the future, that we need to train the students more to recognize these skills and being able to express these skills to the employers.
Paljon kiitoksia. Now, Chiara Finocchietti, sorry. Cimea has been lately working on how new technologies, but especially blockchain, can foster the recognition of students' diplomas across Europe. Can you tell us more about the project Diplomi and how you think that this can be also a model for other ENIC-NARIC? Thank you.
Thanks, Matteo, and welcome also from my side. My intervention is very much in line, is a continuum of the discussion we are having, because it's exactly about recognition. Because one crucial point is for knowledge and skills for the future is how can we recognize those skills and this knowledge. I represent here Cimea, that is the Italian NARC Center. So we are the center that has the role, the duty to give information on recognition of qualification. And we are part of a network of 55 countries. Some colleagues are here at the meeting. And we are committed to do our best to offer the best solution to improve a fair and fast recognition process to applicants. The latest development in the field are, of course, artificial intelligence, also in the field of recognition of qualification. So Italy was the first country with our initiative, with the CIME initiative, together with our Ministry of Education, to launch the blockchain technology, a blockchain technology application in the field of recognition of qualification. And this is a very interesting work. Basically, blockchain, to say it in a very few words, is a register, is a ledger, where information is saved chronologically and publicly. And it is accessible with a cryptographic key. So only with the cryptographic key is it possible to access the information. For this reason, it's very interesting for higher education institution and for public administration more in general. What we do as CIMEA, basically, is when we do an assessment of a qualification, we save the information on the qualification, we save the metadata, we call them the metadata, so the name of the qualification, the name of the holder, the name of the institution, the accreditation of the institution. We save this metadata on blockchain. We save only the very necessary information with the concept of minimization of information. We skipped what is not necessary. And then with this information saved in blockchain, the person, he or she has its own cryptographic key, so he's the only one that can access this information, that can share, and just with a click, she or can share this qualification with whoever he or she wants. So it's a very easy way to share qualification. People move, and qualification should move with them. And in this way, the person that is receiving the metadata, the assessment, the recognition, or the credential also, because we are working also with higher education institutions that award qualification on blockchain. The person who is receive the very necessary information. And what is also very important is that the source of the information is linked to the information itself. So I'm sure that the information is coming from a trusted source. So I can trust this information. So I know that the qualification that I am receiving or the recognition assessment that I am receiving is authentic. So at the end of the day, what we are trying to build is an ecosystem. It's not only our system. It's not only for Italy. We are working, for instance, with France, with the French ENICNARIC, because we think that people move, and also the system to recognize qualification should be a shared one. Having, of course, each one has its own system, but we can have a kind of link together. So we are working to build a common ecosystem for sharing such qualification. And our system is open and it is distributed. And the ultimate goal of this is to better serve the right, because it is a right of people to have their qualification recognized when moving to another country in order to access to higher education or to access to the labor market.
Grazie mille. We will start 2 rounds of questions, actually like theirs. So we'll start with Ms. Finocchietti again. A preliminary topic to discuss about higher education institutions providing and recognizing skills is that these skills should be existing. However, there are some institutions, so-called, for instance, diploma mills, etc., that recognize skills, competencies, and knowledge that actually does not exist. So we're talking about the issue of academic fraud. Can you tell us more about this phenomenon?
Yes, well, exactly. One of the challenges when we speak about skills and knowledge is that we have to be sure that these skills and knowledge are really existing. The phenomenon of fraud in education is a huge one. There is contract cheating, impersonification. There are essay mill. There are a number of a part of this in this phenomenon. But I will focus here only on a part of the cake, that is the fraud, the document fraud. So the fraud related to qualification and the phenomenon of diploma mills that are not accredited institutions that claim to be so. at this kind of institution, they sell academic meaningless qualification. So it's a frightening phenomenon. Just to give an idea about the dimension of the phenomenon, if we look to the economic dimension of this is an industry, as has been authoritatively defined already 15 years ago by John Beer and Alan Ezel, the two authors of the $1 billion industry. The diploma mills has been defined as a $1 billion industry in the United States already 15 years ago. And if we look, maybe you heard about the Axact case. Do you know about this case? This is the biggest scam in higher education related to the selling of fake qualification. And the Axact was a business. They sold 215,000 of fake qualification, 215,000 fake qualification in 197 countries. And according to the mass media, only in the last year of activities, they earned $89 million of US dollars. This is just to give you an idea of how huge the phenomenon is. And I will say that all this money, all this phenomenon represent a double misappropriation for society, because those are tons of money that go to dubious practice and not to real education, not to real authentic higher education institutions. And second, they do not pay taxes. So this money doesn't go to support health, schools, education, public services. So this is only the economic dimension. And then there is a dimension related to trust. If I buy a qualification, I break the link of mutual trust. That is one of the pillars of our democratic society. And I will say one of the pillars, one of the fundamental values of the European higher education area. A third dimension is related to regulated profession. If I buy a qualification to be a medical doctor, a professional license to practice as a medical doctor, as an engineer, I don't have to explain how dangerous this behavior is. And last but not least, I mean, technology is part of the solution. As I said, for instance, with blockchain technology, we can do a lot in fight the phenomenon of fraud in education. But I would like to stress here that ethics is not techniques. Technology is part of the solution, but the integrated cultural approach should be the solution. And I will say here that all of us should be committed, higher education institutions, students, us as NIC Center, all the stakeholders dealing with higher education should be committed in building a culture of trust, a culture of ethics, integrity, and transparency in higher education, because this could be the only way to win the war and not only a battle.
Grazie mille. Jan and Leuknen, also in the keynote speeches, but it's been a recurrent theme during the session, we have talked about skills, different skills and knowledge. So something that is less, I would say, quantifiable and is relating to how a person is and the abilities it has in a social, personal context. So quite a different thing of those that normally a higher education institution does. So bear in mind that higher education institutions are knowledge-centered. How do you think they should be integrated in education? Do you think that they should be part of the curricula as separate subjects, or rather that they should be integrated in education in the way curricula are designed and the contents are taught? And in general, what are doing the Coimbra Group universities to adapt the education they provide and the mission that they have to students and society to the future needs that our European societies will have?
Well, first of all, I cannot obviously speak on behalf of all Coimbra Group universities or their leadership, but what I can say is that I think that many universities are already working on embedding these transversal skills or employability into the curriculum. There are varieties, of course, But what I have understood, this is quite a hot topic at the moment, and I agree that it should be. And in general, universities are taking it seriously, as we've heard here as well. I'm talking from the career services point of view, and we have also in this project we've had international office people also. But I can say that this is quite a hot topic. These skills, when we think about these meta competencies or transversal skills, because of their nature, it's difficult to see how they could be kind of taught directly. For example, if we take resilience or curiosity, how do you teach them in the university surroundings? It's not possible to teach them as such. And many of the skills are the like that it actually might take. We see people from in career guidance sessions, also alumni and masters and bachelor degree students. And I feel that many of these skills are such that it might take several years in the working life until a person kind of really grasps the idea that there is a skill behind this, that I can actually do this, and that it's a skill, you know. So they rather develop slowly within education and working life and extracurricular activities. So it's a complicated issue, I think. So I think it should be a mix somehow. I definitely think that they should be in the curriculum or in the hidden curriculum at least. And it doesn't really matter. Sometimes they can be integrated in a way that the courses are designed as such or subjects are taught as such. But the important thing is that definitely we have to make sure that the students see them, that they are made visible. I'm talking about the learning outcomes here now, and it doesn't exactly mean that we put a label on it, as was discussed earlier. That's not enough, but the students really need to understand that that is a skill, and we are moving towards the transversal skills world. And if they are not in the curriculum, then it might be, the worrying thing is that it's just up to a teacher's ambition. It's up to a teacher to teach them if they want to. So they definitely should be in the curriculum mentioned. You mentioned that the universities are knowledge-driven institutions, and that is absolutely true, at least in the case of research universities. So we must not forget here that the university's main mission is to find or sometimes create and definitely transmit knowledge. That's kind of the core issue why universities are. And even though we are talking about skills and competencies needed in the future, the learning should be definitely built around this knowledge transmission. The degree is planned by professionals who deeply know their core field. And the degree is essential. We must not lose the degree because that's kind of the essence of everything. We must not lose the degree by adding too much in it. And by the way, if there is somebody worrying that is this affecting the way that the trade and industry are going to dictate what to teach in the university, no, I don't believe anybody in this room thinks like that, and this is again a fundamental value of the EHEA. So that's not the case. But the teaching staff should be supported here, how to grasp this complicated issue. And if we look at the reports and predictions about future skills in the labor market, for example, what Ulf mentioned here, World Economic Forum or Institute for the Future have predicted, prediction is difficult as we all know, but they have predicted, for example, competencies such as sense-making or social intelligence or communication, written verbal communication skills, problem solving or critical thinking or adaptive thinking. These are skills that are at the moment the university is teaching these. The degrees are built around these. They're just maybe not that visible at the moment. So the situation might not be that bad after all. So the core competences education in research universities yields, they are already close to what many of the things that those reports mention. So if students can fully absorb the crucial meta-competencies that they sort of acquire in university settings already, it's more likely that the students can convince the employers or make the things visible to employers as well. And back to what Coimbra Group is doing, I have to mention two things. There's also a working group called Education Innovation inside Coimbra Group, and they just invited us to really examine possibilities on how to embed employability skills or employability into the curricula. So professionals who are directly working with education development are highly interested in implementing employability. So this indeed is a topic that should be taken into consideration. And also inside employability working group we have started a project where we gather information from these future skills report and try to reflect them by innovating career services future orientation of what the career services should be doing in 2030 or so on. So kind of to take a fresh look of what the career field should be doing when the world changes. So this is what we are trying to do about the issue at the moment.
Kiitos paljon. Silvia Bernardini, so also today we have talked about this division that we have already, but probably this debate is going to increase in the future, between, on the one hand, generalist versus highly specialized knowledge and general approach of education given by higher education institutions, and on the other hand, this opposition between humanities and social sciences versus STEM subjects. However, in basically all the professions that have been empowered by artificial intelligence, the competencies that are increasingly demanded by the same professional are both highly humanistic and highly technological. So what should be done by the higher education institutions in order to provide students both types of skills and competencies and knowledge, while taking into account the general context the future worker is going to work? Yeah.
Well, I guess this is probably the issue today, right? The issue that we're all faced with several colleagues around Europe. We met in February at Saarbrücken University, and the point of our meeting was discussing whether it still makes sense to see a profession like ours, so the translation profession, as a linguist's profession, so someone who is able to use technology but not to change the way technology works, and on the other side to have the information scientists and engineers who dictate how technology works. Does it still make sense in a world where artificial intelligence is going to be so central? And as I mentioned before, not just to the translation field, but to many, many other fields. Does it make sense that we train or educate our students to be users of technology, even very, very knowledgeable users of technology? So lawyers and doctors, medical doctors, able to use the technology but not able to influence the technology? Does that make sense? And on the other hand, does it make sense to think of engineers and scientists driving these technologies forward without access to or an awareness, or without having an awareness of the many challenges that go with artificial intelligence. Well, from my point of view, I think there's no need in the contemporary world, in say the Western world, to say that STEM subjects are needed. We heard about this morning. It's been the driving force behind many decisions that have been made at an international level, that we needed more STEM graduates. On the other hand, so basically I don't have to argue for that. I think we all agree. But I think what I would like to do is to argue in favor of more humanities and social sciences input in the STEM subject, or a more balanced approach to these two types of knowledge, for several reasons. Okay, taking into consideration the AI field. One aspect is the creativity issue that I mentioned before. If so many of the tasks that we know today, okay, the jobs of the future will be different. We all know that. This has been the case in the past too. The jobs change. This is also a topic that we've heard about repeatedly today. But the crucial issue today is that jobs will change much more rapidly in the coming years. Because we're at a turning point. The new technology that we're seeing, so the availability of massive amounts of data and the capability of processing these data very successfully, means that we still don't know what the jobs of the future will be like in 5 years. So literally, we don't know what will happen, but we know that many people will be jobless. So what remains what remains to be done, on the one hand, is to place more emphasis on the creativity issue. You're probably aware that there's art that's produced by artificial intelligence. I'm sure you've seen that in the news, right? The next Rembrandt was created, was painted by an artificial intelligence system, and it sold for over 300,000 euros. There's music created by artificial intelligence. But that type of creativity is simple recombination of existing pieces, of existing arts, of existing music. Do we really want to say that that's all there is to human creativity? I believe not, right? So there's that we have to take care of. A greater role of original thought in our graduates. And for that, of course, you need also humanities or generalist types of knowledge. But there's a second issue which I think is possibly even more relevant, namely that there are all sorts of challenges that go with artificial intelligence, which means that we will need, for instance, lawyers who are or even philosophers who have to be able to cope with issues like civil and even criminal liability of machines. Okay, this seems to be like science fiction, but it's not. Like if you're struck by a car in the street and that's self-driven, who's going to take responsibility for that? Okay, if nobody drives it. Okay, or if you're operated on by a machine, who says that that machine is able to operate on you? Humans are certified. Okay, there are professions whereby you can only enter a profession if you pass an exam, a bar exam for lawyers, for instance. Who's going to make sure that this technology is certified? Like, so these are issues that seem so far away from us, but they're not. They really are not. So for all those professions, not to talk about the economic issues, who is going to reap the benefits of artificial intelligence if we're all jobless? Because there will be tutors, computer or robot tutors teaching in our classrooms at some point. They're still there in some industry, in some businesses. So if we don't teach anymore, if there are no jobs anymore as we know them, who's going to reap the benefits? Because there will be wealth there, but who's going to take advantage of it? So for all these issues, we need not only scientists, but we need people who are able to cope with the technology from a societal point of view. And that is really the challenge of artificial intelligence from my point of view. So we'll need auditors, we'll need people who certify, we'll need very, very humanistic competences and social competence, as well as the technological competences, which I'm not saying are not necessary. Of course, they are necessary, but they're not enough.
Grazie mille. We continue actually on this topic because automation and the, say, disruptive impact that it has on jobs and also the potentials to create new ones is especially important for professional-oriented higher education institutions where the connection with links with the labor market are paramount. So what is actually Eras's vision on how professional-oriented higher education should adapt and on what skills should be given to the students in order to thrive in this world, creating a balance between highly specialized knowledge and the skills needed in the labor market of today or of 5 years' time, and the flexibility to adapt and to reinvent themselves when the old jobs are going to be destroyed and new ones are going to be created.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I just want to very, very quickly before I answer the question, try to answer the question, to comment on some themes which are surfacing here, and that one is the theme of employability. We are talking about employability, and the question I just want to throw at you is, do we know what employability in the future is? Employability as a concept has a history, and it went from preparation for a job to preparation for the labor market to preparation for the ability to over your lifetime participate in labor, and maybe we need to, you know, make another degree of employability 4.0 or something like that. Just as a question to put it in the room. Hope I don't take the moderator role too much. The other question is, we were discussing or also talking about this issue of, is the university, the higher education institution, an institution which has the function to generate knowledge? Question mark. It's just an open question I would like to also throw into the room. And does it have to be structured around disciplines when problems do not have disciplines? So do we have to structure higher education around disciplines? Does that make sense when problems are not structured around disciplines in the world? Is it making sense that we structure higher education around preparation, a model of preparation, where we know today that my son, he's now 9 years old, and if I'm a professor, so as a father I would like to see him studying, of course, as well, but if he's going to study, if the bachelor and then there is a master degree, it will be 2034, yeah? That's 15 years from now. 11 years ago, 12 years ago, the iPhone has been invented. What do we know about the year 2034? What do we know as professors in higher education about the year 2034? So does it make sense to structure higher education around a preparation model where we think that a bachelor and a master degree is the ultimate solution to prepare people for the year 2034 and beyond? Or do we completely need to change this thinking? So just things to maybe be picked up later in a discussion as well. Well, in Urashi, we are very, very much promoting this integration of the world of work and academia. And that's a very tricky thing, actually, but it's a very promising alley. And the reason for all these different models which member states in Europe come up to combine world of work and academia is that it is a very, very promising model. The objective of this kind of institution, of this kind of thinking, is not just to have graduates in the end of the day in an efficient way, to have them in a certain degree employable, but it is also really to network the institutions which are in a region together with academic institutions, often universities of applied science, so that a professional network, a network of professional higher education in a smart regional ecosystem can develop. That's really the mission of this professional higher education. And the question is, the challenging quest, really the challenging quest, which is also underlying, I think, our discussion here today is actually the labor market a good advisor for knowing what higher education needs to support in terms of skills for the future? Is the labor market, do the labor market organizations know that, or are they too short-sighted? We can debate that, yeah? This is subject of the debate, this is subject of the, let's say, of the fora for dialogue and discussion, which we at Jurashi want to pursue and want to build, actually. I mean, of course, there is also another underlying, and being a professor of education science, I also have to say that now, there's also an underlying discussion, is higher education having the function to be correlated causally to the GDP of a country? Or is it also something which can fulfill the function of pleasure of life? So that's another debate, but I think we need to broaden this debate if we want to have the future creative minds and leaders which are coming with their passion into this world and are not stopping if the world is not put into a sustainable state in the end of the way. Yeah? So I think this is a very important. In Jurashi, we answer this question, is the labor market a good advisor, with a yes, if. Yes, if we can have a broad dialogue about that. And from the Next Skills study, which I reported just some minutes ago, nextskills.org, what is new there is that the responsible persons in these future organizations which we identified and which we interviewed, they are very, very much interested in development of transversal, of universal, of future skills, because they say, you know, the issue with the knowledge is this we can organize. And we have understood that every knowledge a graduate has and comes to us with will be outdated in 3 or 4 or 5 years. We know that, we have understood that. We need creative minds here. And this is what we expect of you, the higher education sphere. And we would like to enter into a dialogue, into a smart network together with you, academic institutions, where we can contribute but not dominate the discussion. So that in the end of the day, we do not risk a blind spot and tell you we need so and so many thousand engineers which need that and that skills in the next 5 years, and in 5 years the world has turned and we need different people. So we need to avoid this kind of mis-steering situation. So in a way, to put it in a provocative end, my feeling, yeah, it's really like a feeling, it's not an empirical result, it's a feeling, is that maybe the world of work in such a dialogue is asking for despecialization of higher education.
Vielen Dank. Now I have a question for Jan and Leuknen. The world of work is asking about a despecialization of the competencies that are taught, meaning also that in the personal and individual set of skills and competencies, etc., the more personalized they are, the more valuable they are in the labor market for the single person. So having this in mind, what is your vision on how students should be the protagonists in designing and also personalizing their curricula?
Well, the thought of student personalizing their own curricula is definitely tempting or appealing, but I am not sure if the students are really ready to do that, to design the curricula themselves. There has to be or should be options, there has to be flexibility, but we have to be really careful that the road to freedom of choice will not be paved with disregard. I mean that we can't leave the students alone. We know what happens with too much to choose from and not having enough information to compare. That's not easy if there are too many options, and we are living in a world with too many options at the moment already. For example, when I come to Bologna and I want to eat well, where do I go? I know there are 357 or something restaurants here, and all of them are offering good food. Where do I go? I don't want to make the mistake of going to a bad restaurant. Just an example. But really, we can't accept the students of barely 20 years of age to be able to profoundly define what they want from the future, what are their interests, what are their goals. They are finding that later maybe, but it's very difficult to build a coherent road to reach the goals, and we don't even know about the future. So in order to move towards that, which is, I think, a good direction that the students can have a say, there must be a lot more counseling available in the universities, and not only in the universities, in high schools as well. A lot more guidance available. The role of career services or employability professionals has to be elevated, and resources allocated there also, as well as international offices maybe. These things have to be taken into the teaching or into the curricula already. And we must not also forget that their career doesn't go, we all know that the careers doesn't go like that. The person decides in high school what they want to do and then they become that. It very rarely goes like that. There's always a certain amount of happenstance in people's careers and things affecting that. There's even a theory called planned happenstance, which is quite interesting. And there already are obligatory courses in many universities that the people can choose from. And there are, at least in some countries, I don't know if that's the case in all over the Europe, but there are quite strong student organizations, and they can have a say to university politics, and they can affect the design of curricula from that as well. So kind of the group power of students can have a say there. And when you look at things from the employer's point of view, and we are talking about research universities here, I'm talking in general. From the employer's point of view, many of the programs or parts of the programs are what they call in the US liberal arts types, sort of a general education, all-round education, and this, I believe, is a strength in the university, and we must not lose that. But for the employer side, it's quite easy to measure and spot the hard skills that the students have. But what we have been talking about is about meta-competencies and transversal skills that we are aiming towards in the society, probably. They are really hard to recognize from the employers. They don't. It's kind of like a child who doesn't know what he or she wants. They don't recognize themselves what kind of things they are looking for. So that's why the skills working life needs now or in the future, they must be embedded in the curricula or embedded in the teaching, and definitely should be made visible to learners. And I'm not saying this is easy. It's not an easy task, and we probably don't have answers to that now, but as we are cooperating here, we can find solutions to that. So the students should have easy access to information and discussion, and they should have reflection help from the personnel to understand where and how these skills can be used. So we need expertise of career services and employability professionals, and we need to support teaching staff. And I want to give you this is just one example, but to highlight the fact how students don't, or people don't necessarily see the skills that they have. We have here a great wall where skillful people are writing what we are saying, and I feel that would be impossible to do. That's a really good skill, but that reminded me of a happening that once a student came to our office and she wanted to have help for her CV. And we looked at the CV, and it was kind of, if you excuse my language, it was crap. It was really blank, and I mean, you had to start from the scratch. It was a really bad CV. And then when we discussed, at some point she showed me how she's making notes in the lectures. And she had a lot of papers with a lot of notes. She was a really good drawer. She drew her notes a bit like the way they are doing now. And I asked that, why are you not using the skills to make your CV? It would be great, your CV, if you used this skill. And she didn't realize that she had a skill. She just had been drawing this, and she thought that the CV must be blank. And yeah, this is what we are talking about, that we need to make the skills visible. So maybe the student's job should not be so much designing the curriculum, but to try to assimilate and reflect what are the meta competencies that they have learned, not only in the university, but in life in general. It doesn't matter from the employer's point of view if a person knows something. It doesn't have to be from a course. And I'm not saying that, again, that the degree is not important. The degree is very important, and it builds the skills. But the students need guidance for this.
Kiitos paljon. We have also to remind ourselves that the students are, of course, the core of higher education institutions. Without them, there will be no such, and that we can all agree about the students as those who actually acquire the knowledge that it is given, then can also give useful feedback. And that's also why, as you were saying, students' representative and students' organization input and the say in the curricula is important in order to better the system. Chiara Finocchietti, now we are going to talk about thorny issue, which is automatic recognition. It can be a really important driver for employment in Europe, and there always have been so many declarations of principles, both from EHEA and currently also from the EU, but this is not a reality yet. So, as Deputy Chair of an NNIC, what do you think it needs to be done in order for automatic recognition to be a reality?
So automatic is it's a appealing word again. So I have some points that could be actually are also other question marks that we can give to the floor for discussion. From my perspective, I would say, first of all, communication. When we speak about automatic, we should be very clear on what we promise, because this is a promising word. So we have to be very clear on what we can promise and what we can maintain, I would say, what we can assure to person asking for automatic recognition. Second point, information provision. This is a crucial point. We should give very transparent and accurate information. If we give transparent and reliable information, well, maybe the process will not be automatic, but at least the person will not be disappointed. If I give a clear information about the time frame, 1 month, 2 months maximum, 3 months maximum, maybe it's not automatic, but at least the person know what have to, know how long the process will take. Third point, fully implement what we already have. We already have a lot. We have Lisbon Recognition Convention, that is the only legally binding text, international text on the recognition of qualification. We have learning outcomes, we have qualification framework, we have quality assurance. I mean, we have a lot. So if we have all this working, fully implemented and working, and diploma supplement as well, if we have all of this in place, then I think we will move a big step forward toward automatic recognition. Fourth, technology could be part of the solution. As I said, if we have a easy, a simple and secure way to share digital credential, and I will say also skills, because we can also share skills and competencies, for instance, with blockchain technology, then the process maybe, again, is not yet automatic, we are not yet there, but will be much faster. If I know that this qualification is authentic, I know who awarded, I have all the information, probably the process will be very fast. And last but not least, we have to work on a culture of recognition. Again, 30 years ago or 20 years ago, when the Bologna process started, recognition was not yet a right. It was the Lisbon Recognition Convention in 1997 that for the first time said recognition is a right of the person. So we know that this is a very huge cultural change, shifting in mentality. So we have to work in this direction. And I mean, 20 years ago, automatic was not really a word on the political agenda. And now this is a top priority at the policy level for us. So I really think that there is a momentum for recognition. So we have the responsibility to move the process forward, to do a step further in this process, also keeping in mind the ultimate goal, again, that we are serving the right of people to move and to have qualification recognized, to access higher education, education more in general, and to access to the labor market in another country.
Grazie mille. Silvia Bernardini, now we are talking again on, now we just talked about automatic recognition as some of the steps that can be done, let's say, in the current framework in order to achieve something which is not automatic, but let's say easier, we can say. Because what's the problem is that the real automatic recognition probably will come only when and if there will be a harmonization, for instance, of the curricula in any way. This is a contentious issue, of course, because for several reasons. First of all, any national culture is different, and also, like in a legislative point of view, neither the HCA nor the EU has competencies on that. However, and I think that this is interesting, there are some examples of harmonization within the framework of the European treaties. There are some examples of harmonization of curricula. One of them is also provided by University of Bologna, and is European Masters in Translation. So my question to Silvia Bernardini is, what is this master? How does it work? Do you think it can also be a model, not only for this specific issue of translation, but also for other academic fields?
Right. Can I just take 1 second before I answer this question about the EMT? Since my colleague before did the same, I think I'm entitled to that, because I just wanted to go back to the topic, what seems to be the topic today, right? The recognition of the so-called transversal skills, or we have different names for them, but we all know, having been here this morning, what we refer to. From my point of view, one of the really big issues is evaluation of these competencies or skills, because I'm not an expert in education like Ulfi is here, but my experience with evaluation is that we're still very much evaluating students on the basis of product, right, of what they're able to deliver in an examination. But here we're talking about process-oriented evaluation, where we want to see how a student has progressed from being an introvert to an extrovert, or how flexible he or she has become. My perception here is that we still don't have those tools. We don't have, also as teachers are not able, or in general, apart from education experts, but overall in universities, are we able, do we have the instruments, the abilities to evaluate students on the basis of these very important skills that we've been discussing this morning? I wouldn't know where to start, I have to say. So this is again an issue for general discussion. And then back to our question, to Matteo's question about the European Masters in Translation Network. I have to specify that it is not a master's, it is not a joint or double degree program. It's a network that's sponsored by DG Translation, the Directorate General for Translation of the European Union, and it's a network that provides a quality label for master's courses in translation across Europe. It's a very interesting network in many ways, because it has two main aims. On the one hand, it provides a standard for translation courses. Courses are free to apply, of course, but the more it the master's network becomes important as a quality label, obviously the more courses want to participate. So it's a sort of bottom-up approach to raising the standards of translation courses across Europe. And interestingly, it's been active for almost 15 years. So there have been 3 rounds of applications. And the first round, about 54 degrees were admitted. In the second one, 62. And in the third one, which was completed a couple of weeks ago, there were 81 programs, translation programs across Europe that entered the European Masters in Translation Network, plus, and this is also interesting, I think, 2 observer programs from Switzerland and 1 from Lebanon, meaning that the European courses are acting as a standard setting, let's say, group that also is operative outside of Europe, even though these courses, of course, cannot take part in the network. So the most interesting part, I think, of our activity, or the activity of the network, is the development of a competence framework that is shared by the members and that is delivered together with input from the industry. This is because in the past, translation courses, there was an issue with whether translation students would be prepared to access the job market when they graduated. So this competence framework, which is redrawn every 5 years before each new round of applications, takes into account both market demands, but also what the members of the network believe to be necessary as skills and competencies that their students have to develop during the course of their degrees. And they turn that into learning outcomes. And the learning outcomes have to do with, for instance, not just translation as an activity, so the ability to produce an adequate translation, but also service provision abilities and interpersonal abilities, so the ability to work in groups, or the ability to take or to use virtual technology for collaborating long distance, or the ability to use technological support, or, crucially for our talk today, the ability to create machine translation engines to evaluate their quality and to know when to use them and when not to use them. Okay? So the interaction with technology is also very important. And what we do when we apply is we submit this very long set of information, including where in our courses we believe we're delivering those contents, or where we believe we're educating our students to these transversal competencies. So it's all self-evaluation, but the label itself is given to the courses that can demonstrate that they do not only teach translation or teach to produce correct translated texts, but also deliver all these other skills and competencies that are believed by the community to be central to their education. Whether this can be expanded or extended, whether this model can work beyond translation, that I wouldn't know. That's a good question. Translation is a special profession in many ways because it needed visibility when the master's the EMT was developed. It needed marketing to the outside world for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning, that we tend to be invisible, translators tend to be invisible, so we needed to make the profession more visible, and I think in many ways that has been a successful achievement of the Masters in Translation Network. The other problem is that the profession is not regulated, therefore having a label of quality was very important. I'm not sure whether the same can apply to other courses where there are strong communities of practice operating, which operate in a sense like the EMT for translation. So, yeah.
Grazie mille. Now to Ulf, the last question. So, talking about the European higher education area, recognition, harmonization, we have a new kid in the park, which is the European education area and the European universities. We also have talked about it. It all started with the Macron speech at Sorbonne that put as a political objective to have in 2024 some 20 European university networks with a long-term, so structural collaboration that will end up in creating single European institutions, releasing European diplomas. There has already been the first call, and the results, as it was said before in the first part of the session, will be announced probably in 2 weeks' time. And so my question is, what does Irashe think about European universities in general and about also this first call? Meaning, do you think that this is a project that suits professional-oriented higher education institutions, and what do you think it would be needed in order to make this project more inclusive of all the types of higher education institutions that we have in Europe?
Interesting question.
Thank you.
Since Yurashi is such a big network, I always hesitate when somebody asks, what does Yurashi think? But of course we have positions on things, but I was wondering about, or I am actually wondering about this question to answer it from which angle to answer it, really. Of course, being a European association, we absolutely appreciate this kind of tool because we think it cannot be underestimated, the value of learning and cooperating. And as I mentioned before, our societies are standing in front of challenges which no one country can solve in the end of the day, so there's no way around. And this, I think, is a very good tool. Another question is, what should these institutions, these networks look like in the end of the day? And in this regard, I think that it is important to think about, do we want to have homogeneous structures, or do we want to have structures which are able to incorporate the diversity of our higher education institutions? And when I think about that, I think the position of Yurashi would be to clearly say that there are a lot of value propositions around integrating the entire diversity of higher education institutions, which we are having in Europe and maybe even beyond at the end of the day, into these university networks. A very simple reason for that, a very taggy line in the way, is what I always like to quote is, technology travels on two legs. And innovation travels on two legs. And that means, in a way, professional higher education institutions, my own, for example, is a very, very highly integrated institution. We are the biggest university of Baden-Württemberg, a south state in Germany. And it is a public university, and by law, 9,000 organizations from public and private sector are member of our university. So it's a public university, a state university, and by law, 9,000 organizations, private companies, public bodies are a member of this kind of institution by law, by state law, by the Higher Education Act. That means that in our committees, there is a certain representation of these private and public organizations. So in our faculty of economics, there are 24 professors and 23 representatives from public and private institutions from the entire sector in Baden-Württemberg. 23 because, of course, in universities, the professors always need to have a majority in all questions around teaching and learning. So this is just one example. And why do I say technology travels on two legs? Because if you look into innovation theory today, it is clear that innovation is not a process where somebody sits in his office and invents a really great thing, yeah, and then it's in the world. But today it is clear that innovation needs innovation agents, yeah? That's the innovation agent theory, which says the different actors which in a field of industry, higher education, the public bodies, this civil society organizations, which need to create innovation, which want to create innovation, they need to have an integrated structure. They need people who are traveling between them and spreading the idea, synthesizing the idea together, and then try to form alliances. And professional higher education institutions are in their DNA set up like that, because the students and the professors and the teachers, they are in a way these traveling agents between the different public and private organizations and the academic arm of the entire endeavor. So that's why I believe professional higher education has a big value proposition when it comes to skills, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to finding solutions which are based on the different pillars of society and not just on the academic pillar, so to speak. And that's why I think we would advocate very much to involve the diversity of institutions into these networks, so that we can really make use of this innovation cycle, of this innovation function.
Vielen Dank, and thank you all for this discussion. Now we open the floor to the discussion. We have one here.
We have a nice example here in Emilia-Romagna of collaboration between university and industries. So we have a network of the 4 universities of the region, Bologna, Modena, Reggio, Parma and Ferrara, and this network is called MUNER, is Motor Vehicle University of Emilia-Romagna. So we involve all the motor company of the area, sport car, Ferrari, Maserati, Lamborghini, Toro Rosso, Dallari, Ducati, Magneti Marelli, and the engineering from this company are teaching in 4 different master degrees on automotive design and also the technician. Moreover, the students are going to make stages inside this company for months. So they have to develop an industrial thesis of research, development, innovation, and they can enter after the master degree in the PhD, industrial PhD program. So they are well trained to collaborate with the industries. And this we are doing for agri-food, that is another area. And we activate also international internship in companies that are all over the world. So for the students it's important to acquire this kind of experience directly with the company. But the advantage is that the engineering and the technician of this company are teaching in the master degree. And this is a nice model of integration between university and industries, in this case sport vehicles.
Thank you very much. Also, it would be an interesting topic on how to actually develop these kind of collaborations in economic depressed zones in Europe. because also if that's another interesting thing about, let's say, more advanced regions and less developed economic regions, and also different opportunities those students can have if they study in one place or the other, thanks to that. I don't know if someone wants to comment on this. Okay. Any other? I will also repeat some of the questions that were asked. For instance, do you think that, where is someone? I don't see it. Okay, here, thank you.
Okay, my name is Piet Hendricks. So I wanted to insist on, I don't want to start a kind of ideological discussion, but one of the things is, and it was also shared by the Coimbra group, knowledge is important. So academic knowledge is important. And stored knowledge is one of the best predictors for further learning in life. We should we should never forget this. This is very important. And also, the other thing is that generic skills are also very important. I am a little bit less pessimistic than Janne about if you can teach generic skills. I think you can. And you can certainly, in small groups, when you teach 20, 30, 40, 50 students, is okay. But now almost all universities in Europe are running into or going to teach active learning. Active learning. That means, well, students are going to learn, are going to investigate themselves some issues. They are trained in problem solving, in creativity, in communication, and so on. It's on the agenda of most of the European university nowadays. So that combination of really gaining academic knowledge at a deep level, and at the other hand, generic skills is a very important one, and not just for the research universities, also for the Hochschule. For example, in nursing or in accountancy, knowledge is very, very important for the future learning of an individual. And so that's really part of, both are really part of academic education. And so I am a little bit amazed about that disjunction often made between learning for knowledge and generic skills. They go together. That's my point of view.
Anyone?
I'm thankful for your comment. Thank you, Pete. Because I think that there often is a big misunderstanding in this area. When we discuss future skills, there's always a discussion about, should we now focus on skills or should we now focus on knowledge? So, and I very much like this idea of an integrated model where we say knowledge is a part of skill and skill is a part of professionalism. And the higher you come, so to speak, on the staircase of professionalism, the more it involves ethical questions of the very profession which you are actually learning also. So I wouldn't even go into the direction to say this is a distinction. I think this is an integration, but it is a plus on top of knowledge, so to speak.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think possibly the point is not so much whether we're teaching the various skills or whether the students acquire the various skills that we've been discussing this morning, but whether we're able to convey that fact to the external world, including the student. Because this topic has surfaced repeatedly this morning, that we probably already do very much, like our first keynote speaker said this morning, we're already doing a lot in that sense, but are the students aware? Are the employers aware? And that goes back to my question about evaluation, about whether, because in the end, if the students acquire knowledge and in the process they also develop the skills, if we then only test them on the knowledge they've acquired, what happens of the skills? Will they be aware that they've developed those skills? if we only test them on the knowledge. And this may only be my experience, I don't know, but in many places, an exam is still, an exam whereby the student has to show that they've learned their maths or they've learned their, law. So in a sense, I think that's a problem that we have to solve, that we have to come up with ways of making these skills more testable, tested, and obvious to the external world, including our students. Well, first of all, our students.
I think this is really important, especially because the thematic of examination is like the end of the whole process, and the way you examine is also, let's say, a statement on the mission that the education has. And so changing the examination means also changing how our education works, and this is something which is really important that all the stakeholders, including students, are aware of and also involved in. There's Ms. Blatt that wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I just want to support you, Sylvia. I think we should launch a project. Is it possible to evaluate the soft skills or transversal skills? When you told about the example of the student that was not aware of her skills or his skills when it comes to do wonderful things like the ones behind us, that awareness has to be risen in one way or another. And perhaps students are, when they are evaluated, they will be very much more aware of these skills, I think. So I realize that it's very difficult, but to launch a project to find out, is it possible? Instead of saying it is possible, but have a question to start with. The only thing I know is just now that perhaps I think it's in several countries where researchers during the researchers' night or in connection to that have some kind of researchers' Grand Prix where they present their research in 5 minutes. And it's both the performance, the content, and the trustfulness, but also if they express themselves in an understandable way for persons outside their field. This is for joy, but also for training for young researchers. But, well, to launch a project inside the Bologna follow-up group or somewhere, I think it would be useful.
Thinking of an instrument like a portfolio that would somehow make all these hidden competencies and skills surface at the end of that would require some research, but I think it would be extremely valuable. Thank you. Thank you.
Just a short comment. Yes, true. There was in what Ulf mentioned about the Next Skills project, there was an interesting, particularly interesting thought about the thought of the change of the structure of learning, which would lead to this, which would show as easy credit transferring between institutions and micro-learning and an overlap of studies and working life. And I don't know, we are all guessing here about the future, but maybe we will see a future where this idea of lifelong learning will become more true than it is at the moment. If we really see that the studies and working life will overlap, that we have people going in and out to study, then maybe these transversal skills and meta competencies, I feel that they would come more visible to the students. They would. It's more. It's easier to understand when you are doing actually things what you have learned and what these complicated things that you learn from the university studies, they become more visible when you actually do something and realize that, hey, I know this, I know how to do this, I don't know where it came from, but I know. I think we all have experience on these kind of things.
Thank you. And also we have to remind that the mission of also these sessions is to provide inputs for the next ministerial conference. And I think that in general, like turning this session into a policy making proposal would be a really interesting outcome, I think. And I think that in general, this is also the most, let's say, fitting room in order to make such a proposal, because we have people from all over Europe that are interested in the subject. So I think that also this is the right moment to make up, like, say, policy proposals, because we have here the community that cares about this issue, and also we have here the community that is in each bit part of the policy making process of IHEA, EU, and our national education systems. Is there any other question? I don't see none. So I'm thanking you very much for our panelists. Thank you also the audience.